it's nice to be among skeptics. I will say that generally good newsrooms are filled with them. They should be, right? So this is a talk on fake news versus wrong facts. I think since the term came out, I would say it has morphed bigly from its original meaning. It's thrown around these days by people who don't like a particular story and what it has to say, or they don't like the angle of the story. Here, I am using it to mean stories that are made up. And I want to be really clear, because I think that's, and I'll get, in the talk, I'll talk about the false facts part. But these are things that are intentional fabrications meant to mislead. And it's not the same thing as a reporter making a mistake. And that, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I don't know about you, but I have relatives on Facebook who post stories, and I'm like, and tilde? I don't have an and tilde really, but I'm trying to protect the naive here. I don't know where, you heard that Michelle Obama is a transgender man, and that Muslim nurses aren't allowed to wash their hands before operations, but it's not true. And I have to say, I did see it was relatives who first made me aware of this phenomena, and it's interesting. It tended to be, my father and his generation. And so initially I thought, well, maybe it's just they don't understand new forms of communication as well. They're easily misled. But over time, I've come to think that may not really be the case. And I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to start with a story that I did not long after the election of Donald Trump to the presidency. About 10 days before the last presidential election, this story, and hopefully I'll do this right. Let's see. This story appeared on the website of a publication called the Denver Guardian. It's pretty dramatic. You got the house in flames, the thick smoke, the fighters in their protective gears. I mean, who wouldn't click on that? And a very, very suggestive headline. FBI agent suspected in Hillary Clinton email links found dead in apparent murder-suicide. Now, for a moment, you might think this is real. The Denver Guardian sounds like a real newspaper. Photo looks authentic. And as far as we know, the photo is authentic. There's a tab for careers, advertising, you can see them. There's even tabs for horoscopes and obituaries. And if a friend sent you to the site, you might think it was for real. And you might be inclined, especially to think if it was for real, if you had a certain worldview already. And that old worldview is that Bill and Hillary Clinton murder their adversaries. And lest I forget that DNC Chair John Podesta and Hillary Clinton were running a child trafficking ring from the basement of a pizza shop in Washington, D.C. Now, in fact, a lot of people thought that this particular story was real enough that they shared it with their friends on Facebook. It had over 500,000 shares. And a few days before the election, it hit the trending topics on Facebook. Interestingly, just this week, Facebook now says it's getting rid of trending topics, which is an interesting development in the ongoing saga of what we're going to do about fake news. But after the election, when the real news media suddenly became obsessed with fake news and realized it may have played a role in swaying voters, we started talking about it amongst ourselves, a group of us at NPR, about how to cover it. And this particular story, we wondered, well, who wrote it? Why had they written it? And so I began a journey to answer that question. As you probably know, there have been some reporting about young teens in Macedonia who were making money by writing fake news and sending it over here, and making more money than they'd ever made in their lives, simply run from the ads office. So I didn't know if I was going to end up going to Macedonia. The first thing I tried to do was find somebody who owned the domain name. And by the way, I want to be clear before I just take one other step. Every single thing about this article is false. There is not one true fact. It is absolutely false. The picture is real, as far as I can tell. That's a real fire. You know.
Mailbox too?
I think so. Never know. Photoshop could be. I needed to find somebody, what I discovered, it was registered anonymously, and this is a thing. I actually have thought, God, I wonder, there's like a whole little subculture going on online of ways to register domains anonymously. Like there's a business going. There's always like a business somewhere somebody's running. So it was anonymous. I, not having the technical skills to go further, found myself this lovely guy from New Zealand, John Jansen, and he did some digging for me. And I'm going to give you a slightly, hopefully understandable version of what he did. The Denver Guardian was created with WordPress. And that enabled John to see a lot of information from the first entry. He found a handle there, and the handle was, "Let Texas Secede." Then he found other places in WordPress where that handle was used and other sites, and they all shared what they call an advertising tag. And an advertising tag basically are a bunch of sites that share the same tag so that you on Google can track the ads. So it would indicate that one person owned all these various sites. The sites all seem to be on one server within Amazon. Eventually, he found an email address that was attached to Let Texas Secede, and we found a name and a company. And the company was called Disinfo Media. NPR's library helped me find an address for the office and a home address, and the person's name, and here I do not jest, was Justin Kohler, as in, jest. So I wondered, is this a real name? I didn't know. And then it appeared that he lived outside of LA. So I decided to take a visit. His office turned out to be a P.O. box. But right around the corner was his house. And so I and my producer decided to go to his house, and we pulled up, and now, because I'm an audio journalist, I'm going to play you the tape of my visit here. Let me see if I can get this right and get it to play. Hold on. Oh, I may need help here. The mouse doesn't seem to be... Oh, wait, there it is. Hang on. I think I'm okay. The minivan. All right. So he's got a minivan. It's a one-story home, kind of a beach bungalow home. And there's a palm tree in the front lawn because, hey, this is Southern California. There's an American flag, so he may be a patriot. So, all right, we're going to give it a shot now. So we get out of the car. I'm a little nervous because it's clearly somebody's home. Hi there.
Hi.
Looking for Justin Kohler?
What?
Wanted to ask him something?
Okay.
Had a story that I'm wondering if you wrote.
No.
You didn't write it?
No.
So you know, I'm a reporter with NPR, and we were looking online and through a lot of tracing, discovered that Disinformation Media was the owner of several websites that, such as the nationalreport.net.
All right. Sorry, guys. I want to tell you.
Nothing?
Good day.
There's nothing new? All right.
All right.
Thank you.
But Laura, that was totally him.
Oh, I'm sure it was him. We actually even checked, the mailman happened to be going by, and we said, does Justin Kohler live there? And he confirmed he does indeed. So we were sure it was him.
So that was Planet Money correspondent Robert Smith interacting with me there. We left Mr. Kohler. We basically said, well, here's a card. You change if you happen to come across Mr. Kohler. Let him know we came by. And it turns out, and I am really serious, that Mr. Kohler is an NPR fan. And he wrote me the strangest email about an hour after we left. He said, I've long been a fan of NPR, and though people in your position actual journalists, may not appreciate what I've done. I do believe we share a similar interest in protecting the credibility of the traditional news outlets who are now, due to a rise of social media, threatened by any idiot with a blog, myself included. And in case you're wondering what he looked like, here he is. This is the man whose little empire posted that stories. And Justin Kohler is his real name. And this whole thing, what he said is this whole thing was initially a joke. He had, he was a website designer, and he liked to poke fun at the right-wing echo chamber. He's a Democrat. And he was trying to said, I wanted to point out how crazy the alt-right was. And we checked, he was a registered Democrat. Here are some of the names of the sites that he owned, just some. I mean, he was kind of like a godfather of fake news. I mean, it's amazing. So Kohler says, he told me that stories like this one in the Denver Guardian were what he called red meat for the alt-right echo chamber. He said it fit right into their narrative. I mean, he knew this narrative that they had about the Clintons, and so this was good stuff. Red meat. And this is interesting. I don't know if it's still true because the environment has changed since then, but he said he did try to do left-wing fake news, but it never caught on. And there is some evidence that this is true. According to a study out of Stanford, of the known false news stories that appeared in the 3 months before the election, those favoring Trump were shared a total of 30 million times on Facebook, and those favoring Clinton were shared 8 million. So there's some evidence that maybe people on the left are slightly more skeptical. But I'm not forgiving them either. They've made plenty of mistakes. Now, he also gave me some insight into how he evolved as a fake news proprietor. And I think this is important to understand as we think about the phenomena because it's the economics, right? You notice that some of the sites take real news media names and add a .co to the end. So someone could make a mistake and end up there, right? So WashingtonPost.com.co. But Kohler says that at a certain point, he started getting into trademark hot water. So he stopped doing that. He evolved. He started buying names that no one owned but sounded good. Like they could be a real local name, paper, like, the Denver Guardian. And he said it. He said, I saw that as the next wave in fake news. And of course, he was able to run ads against these fake news sites. So he was making money. His satire of right-wing alt news had turned into a business that was now generating, he told me, between 10 and 30K a month for him. So it may have started as a joke, but the money was for real. He says after the election, Google started to pull ads from sites it deemed fake news, and some of his got flagged, but let me give you what he had to say about that.
There are literally hundreds of ad networks, literally hundreds of them. Early last week, my inbox was just filled every day with people, because they knew that Google was cracking down, hundreds of people wanting to work with my sites.
Yeah, I mean, now this guy, because I outed him, this is actually sort of funny. He's now appeared at various things to be like on panels as an expert on fake news. Last time I actually finally, sat down with him. The interview that you heard, that piece of tape, I was actually in a studio and he was at home with an engineer, so I didn't see him. I then ran into him at South by Southwest at a Knight Foundation event. I mean, I was like. I mean, we are seeing companies like Facebook and Google try to do something to prevent the spread of fake news. Unfortunately, their efforts have not been that successful. Facebook attempts to deal with the problem have actually at times made it worse. So, for example, a recent thing that the company started to do was de-emphasize posts from official accounts on newsfeed in favor of things posted by family and friends. The problem is that your family and friends, like my aunt, post a lot of fake news. Part of the problem is that the purveyors of fake news are really good at getting your attention. I got to tell you that being in the real news business, sometimes a story can be really important, but it's really hard to get people's attention to that story. And it is a problem we face all the time. Whereas if you're just making it up, hell, that's easy. If you already believe, the murder narrative of the Clintons, you're going to go right there. Meanwhile, the change in the news feed has actually had an impact on legitimate news sites. So a lot of legitimate news sites were depending on Facebook traffic to get people there, and visits started to go down from Facebook. Some sites were less dependent on Facebook, others have had to find replacements. But in some places, it actually did have the effect of practically censoring real news and pushing forward fake news. So for example, in Slovakia, they tried this. A Muslim man, there was this story going around that a Muslim man had thanked a good Samaritan for returning his lost wallet and had warned the Samaritan of a terrorist attack that was planned at the Christmas market. This was a completely fabricated story. It wasn't true. The local police issued a warning, but when they issued it on Facebook, they found that the message, unlike the fake news story, could no longer appear in the news feed, because it was from an official account. So there's a certain level at which you watch these companies try to do something, and it does feel like, trying a house full of roaches, and, it's hard to get rid of them. And yet a growing number of Americans, as recently as November, 45% of Americans, according to a study by Pew, got at least some of their news from Facebook. Meanwhile, Google presents, a different set of problems. I'm going to just pop this up here. Okay, this was a story I did in October, but I think, you still see this happening. So you may remember the horrible shooting in Las Vegas, 58 people killed. I mean, just terrible. And the name of the guy who did it was a guy named Stephen Paddock. But shortly after the shooting, another name started to float around, and this name was the name of a man who had been married to the woman who was living with Stephen Paddock, Mary Lou Danley. And the man's name first emerged as the possible shooter on 4chan. Now, I don't know if any of you know what 4chan is, but it's basically a site for trolls and a lot of conspiracy theories. It emerged on a site, there's a message board called Paul, which is /politically incorrect. His Facebook page, they discovered, indicated he was a liberal. And the far right-wing trolls went to work. You started to search on Google within the first hours after the shooting, and this man's name came up. And I'm not going to say his name simply because the poor guy has been through enough. I don't think we need to keep talking about him, But it was listed on the top of the search results, and a link to 4chan. And then it started surfacing on Twitter. I mean, could you imagine being this guy? He didn't do anything wrong, and suddenly all these people are tracking him down and saying, see, a liberal did it. And it went on even after they ID'd Paddock. Now, I was trying to figure out, why did this happen? What was the cause here? And it appears that there is just a basic issue with how Google operates with breaking news. And really, I don't know how they're going to resolve this. But when something happens, if there's been no information on somebody, so this gentleman, whose name we shall not mention, there wasn't much on him out there. But as soon as his name started to surface, Google basically has, I don't know, I guess they're little bots, really. They were going around constantly searching the web in terms of what's new and bringing it together. And that's what they found. So they started to, if you put his name in, new things started to pop up, and that's what Google's algorithms pulled together. These are the first mentions of this guy, 4chan, elsewhere, and it just is in there. And Google doesn't do anything about it. And, the problem is they haven't had time really to sort through the search results. So what they'll do is they will show what they know about this particular name, this particular keyword. In a statement, which is all I would get from Google, they said, those results should not have appeared, but the company will continue to make algorithmic improvements to prevent this from happening in the future. I find myself wondering, but in what world does 4chan show up? Seriously, I could not understand that. I mean, there should be something in the algorithm that knows that 4chan is not a credible site. And it didn't. And Twitter doesn't really have much of a check on, quote unquote, fake news. They're beginning to work, with harassment and trolls and people like that and starting to take things down. This is a whole different phenomenon from Justin Kohler, right? But it's essentially the same result in the sense that there are people who, hard to know whether those trolls on 4chan knew what they were doing or not. Really hard to know, but there are sort of groups like Paul on 4chan where you have people who are far right, some of them may be Russian trolls, distinctly possible, who want to push this false narrative. But the problem is the companies pick it up. I don't think anyone at Google wanted to perpetuate this. It's just, this is how Google functions. They're cataloging the world's information in real time. And unfortunately, when there's a market for something, for anything, it's going to keep happening. Google wants eyeballs on its search. Google wants you to come there and come to get the first news. There's a market incentive for Google to do this, actually. And I posit that the ad-based structure, that economy of the web is problematic. And I'm not the first to say this. In fact, somebody quite well known, Jaron Lanier, has been going around talking about this. Jaron coined the term virtual reality. He comes from the sort of headier days of tech when it was a bunch of hippies, and the whole Earth catalog in that world. And he said back then, everybody believed that everybody had to see every bit of information. It had to be totally democratic. And so this ad model started. And there are going to be people like Justin Kohler who are going to make money. And some people have been talking about lawmakers stepping in and regulating in some way. This I noticed when I watched Mark Zuckerberg testify before Congress in April. Made me wonder whether it was a good idea. Ted Cruz pressed Mark Zuckerberg on whether the company was dominated by liberals who were trying to prevent conservative news from being seen. So one of the things that you're seeing happen now is that Facebook tries to be an arbiter in some way. And then, for example, what does Facebook do with, abortion is not linked to breast cancer. It is absolutely not true. And yet somebody on the right will say, well, that's information, you're being biased against conservatives if you keep that information off your site. So this makes me ponder as I'm thinking, what are we going to do about this problem? Is Congress the place you want to go for help? I don't know. Meanwhile, the credibility of the honest media and by that, I simply mean the media that's actually trying to get the facts right has gone down. Our credibility is in the toilet. While President Trump has added to this problem by labeling CNN, the New York Times, and elsewhere fake news media, leaving us in a precarious position, we do have a problem. Here's another slide I want to show here. Oh, hang on. All right. Who remembers Judith Miller's reporting leading up to the Iraq War? Right? You're all like, oh yeah, weapons of mass destruction. She reported on the front page of the Times that there were weapons of mass destruction, and there wasn't none. Now, I would posit that as infuriating as that story turned out to be in hindsight, it is not fake news. It is wrong facts. It is somebody who, remember, this is somebody who had not long before won a Pulitzer Prize, Judith Miller. So her editors had some reason to believe her. She was very well sourced. Unfortunately, one of her sources who had previously told her things true in the past This time was full of it. But it definitely turned out to be one of the worst mistakes I have ever seen a journalist make. I mean, there have been a few others, but it was, look at where we are now. And it's a cautionary tale. Unfortunately, I think it also helped lay one of many things that has happened that has laid the foundation to mistrust all professional media. And now we have this world where it's kind of conflated, right? So if I make a mistake in a story, and believe me, I do, because I am human, and nothing feels worse, truly, as a journalist to have your say, you got its name wrong. But I'm like, I mean, what do we do? We're in an interesting position now as people who are actually trying to be real media. There is, as you can see, I think there really is a difference between Judith Miller and Justin Kohler, or between Judith Miller and the trolls on 4chan. But I feel like we are now living in a world in which people are conflating the two. And sadly, I think this works to the advantage of authoritarians. I remember hearing back when Tiananmen Square happened in China, that after the government came in and, laid waste to a lot of people, and those horrible scenes that we saw afterwards, when our media went and started to talk to Chinese who had heard the government version of events, the people would say, the truth is probably somewhere in between. But it wasn't. The truth wasn't in between. One thing was true and one thing was not. But you can see how this helps somebody who's an authoritarian government. You just sow enough doubt. I have to tell you, I'm at this moment right now. I mean, I've been covering all of this for a while, and it happens regularly. And I find myself puzzled as to how to move forward. This is a precarious moment when nobody seems to be able to tell the difference between a mistake and intentionally fake news. And I would say, you look on the far left, there are people who think the mainstream media didn't give Bernie Sanders a fair enough shake, and they don't trust the mainstream media as a result. And while I can't entirely defend the mainstream media, I can say they missed it. They didn't quite see it coming. And they're human. They're human, and they do have biases, and I think the key is for us to keep working and trying to avoid the pitfalls of those biases. I don't think we've figured out how to hold companies like Google and Facebook accountable, and Twitter. A free marketeer would say the market will eventually do it because people will stop using their service if it isn't accurate. I've seen no evidence of this. I mean, even now with, trust in Facebook gone down and the huge thing that just happened with Cambridge Analytica, their stock went down for a few days and then it went right back up. When I think about how to solve the problem, one thing does go through my mind, and I'm just going to throw this out there, that I think trust needs to be reestablished between professional media and the public. And I think one of the ways to do that is local news, which has been decimated for a few different reasons. One of the reasons began before the internet, which simply that you got these huge companies who were buying local papers all over the place and cared more about their profits than they did about serving their communities. And the second is, of course, the Craigslist and the undermined classifieds, which was a big source of money. But I think that the cannibalization of local news media had started before that. And so in my mind right now, the question becomes, how do we get back strong local journalism? And this is why. Because if you have a journalist in your community who's going to community board meetings, who you're seeing and is reporting on matters that you know in front of your eyes are for real, you can tell that this becomes somebody you trust, even when they make a mistake, because you've developed a relationship with that entity. I would say in some ways, but I'm of course biased, that public radio is in one of the best positions to fill this gap as a nonprofit entity that can be in communities, reporting local news that doesn't have a huge profit motive. And I think we could establish, again, some kind of trust. Because so much of this is about, who do you trust? Well, I trust my relative, right? Or I don't trust my relative in my case. Or I trust my friends, you know? But because I'm a journalist, I don't even trust my friends, so. But I ask you, you know, and I want to open this up to questions and thoughts on this, because I really do think, as people who are concerned, and you clearly are a group of people who are concerned about people spewing forth baloney, whether it be, you know, green Martians or healthcare scams, right? But what can we actually do to create a public that has a better sense of discerning what is a fact and what is not? And you know, I've been a journalist for nearly 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. NPR still remains one of the more trusted brands, but I think most of you probably know we also get labeled lefty, which I can guarantee you we are not, because I just know we're not. But it helps the other, you know, it helps far-right people to label us that way. So even our sense of trust, I think, has gone down. We're still more trusted than a lot of other sources. But anyway, I want to open it up to questions from you guys about what's going on. I mean, there are so many ways in which this is, just sort of want to conclude here to say there are so many ways in which it's being spread, and you have these companies, they're not going to go away. This moment where we are going to have this process of all kinds of people putting stuff out there, it's not going to stop. So what do we do? What do we do? And I wish I could come up here and give you an answer. Nothing would make me feel better than to have a really strong answer. But there are a lot of people working on this, and thus far I've not seen somebody really come up with a good answer. So, questions?
First question back here.
Hi. Great talk, but I'll just pick on the thing I disagree with because it's the skeptical thing to do. A lot of what you said makes sense. The parts about holding certain companies accountable, I think it's important to, like, we know who's accountable. It's the people who are manufacturing lies.
Right.
For me to say a tool that searches the internet, or to say it's Facebook's concern that your aunt posted something that's untrue, is like, let's blame the mailman for delivering some bullshit I opened in a letter.
Well,
right?
that's how the law sees
at a
it.
massive scale.
That is how the law sees it. There's no legal responsibility now that these companies have.
No, I'm saying, like, to your point, like, how do we hold these people accountable? I don't think that's the place to look. I think the place to look is the source of the lies and just the conversations you're talking about having with people and trusting journalism and learning about good journalists and all that stuff. So, yeah, that's just a comment.
I mean, I think it's hard because these companies, unfortunately, also have a financial incentive not to do much unless we really push them to do something. That's part of the problem. So if you just let this go on, and I mean, I guess I want to say, in an ideal world, you're right, but it is such a not ideal world. And fake news, this has been documented, fake news spread faster than real news.
But it's more outrageous.
It's more outrageous, yeah. And I mean, gossip. Ooh, who doesn't love a little gossip, right? Which is essentially what a lot of this is. Okay, another question here.
Yeah, we hear so much about Russian interference and foreign people and bots and scammers and all of this in the last election in particular, and I presume it's still going on.
Yeah.
How much of the problem is that kind of intentional foreign outfits versus the background of misinformation that we just have all around us?
You know, that is a very hard question to answer because I don't think anybody's documented that. It seems to me, too, from what I've seen, the way the sort of foreign Russian trolls and stuff do is they will take something from, say, like with the 4chan thing. It is distinctly possible there were Russian trolls who helped spread that. It may not have started with them, but they may have helped spread it. So a lot of times they're just there spreading baloney that they know is going to help divide the country. I mean, they're interested in dividing the country. And they have been for some time, actually, even before the internet. It's something they've wanted to do in the United States. But I don't think there's any way we can know for sure. There's just a whole variety of reasons this stuff spreads that range from stupidity to, true evil.
Next question is all the way at the back.
Hi. So I'm curious, as skeptics, we talk a lot about wanting to spread critical thinking, and I personally think that teaching critical thinking, especially in our youth, would be a possible solution to this particular problem. So I have a two-part question. One is, can you impart skills onto us that maybe we can teach others on how to find out, whether or not this site is reliable, how to rank reliable news sources, those sorts of things. And then the second part of my question is, when do we start freaking out about this? In other words, I genuinely believe that freedom of the press is important for our democracy to thrive. And having information and being good critical thinkers is an important thing. And it seems like it's under threat, but then we have people constantly telling us like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, everything will settle down, we're just polarized right now. So I'm curious what you think about sort of what's the extreme and when do we freak out, I guess.
I personally think you should be freaking out. I think this is undermining our democracy. Because if we can't, as a democracy, at least come together on some established facts that we can all agree on, how do we function? And we are at that point. We have parts of the country, we can't agree on really basic stuff. So I do think it's time to freak out. I think that this idea of like, what can I do to, help you? I would say, when I go and look at something, and I'm trying to think, I actually had an experience where I almost spread a fake news thing myself, and because it can be hard, a friend sent me something, and I'm trying to remember if it had to do with Snowden or something like that, and who came out and agreed with something that had happened, and I almost sent it, and then I looked, and I'm like, wait a minute. Click on it. I look at the site where it came from. I think, you could have told with that site, if you clicked any further, you would have seen it was not a real news site. There was not enough there. You would have seen it pretty quickly. I think it doesn't take that much, usually, to look at a site and, sniff around a little. The other thing is, if you're seeing it on a site you don't know, start to look at sites you do know. Are they reporting the same thing? And not that there aren't small outfits that sometimes get something first, but if you are not starting to see more outlets pick it up and it's an important story, worry. That would be one place I would start. There's many others. Critical thinking taught in schools. I think at this point, every single school in this country, starting in junior high school, should be taught how to research on the internet and determine by looking at it what actually seems credible and what does not. So
we've got one here.
I don't. Where's the mic? I guess.
I'm over here.
Yep.
Oh, so I'm just wondering, maybe there has to be some limits to freedom of speech. If these Sandy Hook parents want to go after Alex Jones for everything he, put him in bankruptcy 5 times till Tuesday. Well, why does people go out and get to make profits off huge lies and ruin people like Alex Jones? The man is nuts, and all he's
nuts,
doing
and he tells things that are completely false. It's interesting. I don't know. Well, I know exactly where your sentiment comes from because I've had it myself. Then I try to actually think in my mind, well, how do you get to a situation where you don't end up, shutting down legitimate organizations that make a mistake? It's just very hard to write a law where you would really get the bad guys. We do have defamation laws, and so if you're, the best defense is truth, right? Somebody attacks you for defamation. Europe is stricter. I don't know, maybe Europe's way is better. They are stricter, and maybe it's better. They have functioning democracies, but I haven't looked into it enough, so.
Question all the way at the back.
All right.
Two things. First off, we do have software and we need to revamp it. It's called Web of Trust. And it is a Chrome plugin that we can use to crowdsource and evaluate websites. The second thing is there is already a website. It's in the top 4. Whenever you Google something, you're going to hit it almost automatically, and that is Wikipedia.
Yes.
And we have to, and I'm not kidding, we have to own this, people. We need to get these pages rewritten correctly, patrolled, kept the vandalism off, because this is where people are getting their information. And I'm constantly hearing people say, yeah, someday, whatever. I'm telling you, we are not going to get a hold of this problem of fake news until we can take care of Wikipedia. Every rule on Wikipedia is aimed with the skeptic viewpoint. I know I sound passionate about it, and that's because I keep preaching this, but we have to have control of Wikipedia. And the rules are there, and my project will teach you how to do it. So let's stop complaining and trying to invent some new thing when it's already sitting there waiting for you to learn and do it.
No comment, she said it.
Hi. My quick solution for a lot of this is bring back debate to high, like you say, junior high and high school. Back in the old days, it used to be a regular thing, but I recently spent $300, said I'll give you, if you'll, to the local schools out there in Amador, if you will start a debate club. And they all turned it down, all the high schools.
That's too bad.
And the U.S., I think, is very badly complicit in this, as we have throughout the world. The CIA has been doing exactly this kind of thing, spreading fake news on a regular basis to affect elections.
It's not new. Fake news is not new. It's been here.
Right.
It's always been here.
Yeah, and then they developed these techniques to a high degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Russians spent, what was it, $100,000? We spend millions on the exact same kind of thing in various nations where we want to affect the result of the election.
No, I mean, it's true. And actually, I think for the Russians, it is my understanding from all the reporting that I've seen that does seem credible, that they are amazed at how successful the whole thing was. Because it's not, they've tried this. There were definitely instances where they tried this in the past. They tried to plant things in newspapers. But once you get rid of the gatekeepers, and I don't, there is this nostalgic part of me that would like to go back to that world where we had some gatekeepers. But I don't think we are gonna. I don't think it's gonna happen. So that's why I'm sort of struggling with, well, if that's not gonna happen, how do we at least get people to say, oh, these are trustworthy sources. I'm gonna be more skeptical of these other places because I've never heard of them, or because, it's a tough one. It's a tough one.
We're back here for the next question.
Hi, I really, really appreciate what you have done and what you're saying here, and the question seems so central to our democracy. But one of the problems that I have as a skeptic is when I try to find out information, is that I come up against websites that you have to be a member, that you have to pay, or you have to be teaching faculty at a university to have access to. And a lot of us don't. I have friends who are freelance journalists who don't have access to that information, let alone me. And I think it's really important to point the finger at how much of there is a price tag to information, verifiable information.
Yes, there is.
JSTOR. Every single time I'm researching something, it's on JSTOR. And I don't have access to that. I think we have to, as a, society, look at that. We put a price tag on these information, and we make it exclusive. And then we complain that, there's fake news out there.
Well, I mean, I think, in some ways it's like, I wish we could reinvent public media. We are trying to reinvent public media, but in the sense that, it should be a free source of credible information for the entire country. And it is, but we can't do it all. I mean, the problem is ultimately, you know how much work I put into finding that guy and how many hours the piece took and all of that? I mean, that takes, I got to pay my bills, I got to eat. And nobody seems to want to pay. And this is a problem. I mean, actually, if you look, though, at some places people are paying, the results have been good. Netflix, you have to pay. So, and it's a lot better than, watching, Charlie Bit My Finger, which was fun. It was fun. But, if you want, quality writers and scripts and all of that, you're going to have to pay something. And I think if you want quality journalism, you're going to have to pay. And nobody wants to hear that. We are starting to see, the Times is finally getting to a point where they're actually doing pretty well, and people are getting subscriptions, and I guess you get, 7 free articles or something. So for people who want to regularly use the Times, you got to pay. And I have no problem with this. I think people need to pay if they want quality information.
Okay.
They did. They always did, right?
We do have to move on. I know there are more questions, but we have to move on to the arguably more fun part of the evening. So please thank.
It's all right. Thank you all so much, and thank you for being skeptical.